School Strike for Climate is a group of international students who are refusing to go to school until climate change is dealt with in the way that they see fit. The most popular and best known of these individuals is by far Greta Thunberg, and she rose in notoriety because she refused to go to school every Friday. Instead, she would simply sit by the government building holding this sign. And because of that, she is now a world-renowned figure. Now, I'm not going to talk too much about Greta Thunberg except for this article that she wrote last weekend, titled Why We Strike Again. And I think this article is important because, as we'll see in a little bit, she basically admits in this article that the reason she's striking is not just because of climate change, it's not just about the environment. Instead, it's because of all of the things that she wants to change about society as a whole. And as we'll see, she wants to change everything. Before we get into that, I do want to point out that the students who are a part of School Strike for Climate are not really being done any favors. You see, the media and their parents and sometimes teachers are encouraging them to not go to school and to strike for climate change. While I admit that some of them may in fact be very passionate about this and maybe even well informed on climate change, I think it's safe to assume that many of them are just doing this because they're given a free out. I mean, if everyone is seeing this strike as a positive thing, who would not take the opportunity to not go to school and claim it's because of this? So now let's look at the article where Greta Thunberg basically admits her climate change activism is not just about climate change. So it's towards the end. I'm just going to read this highlighted portion here where she says, colonial, racist, and patriarchal systems of oppression have created and fueled it. Talking about climate change. We need to dismantle them all. Okay, so we'll read one more thing really quick. A little bit below, it says, but to change everything, we need everyone. So she wants to change everything. And in her mind, that's done by getting rid of colonialism, racism, and patriarchal systems of oppression. Now, I'm not trying to defend racism or anything like that because obviously it's not acceptable. But the problem is just because she thinks something is a racist system of oppression does not mean that it is. For example, by this point, basically all of the Democratic candidates have come out and said that the United States of America is a racist system of oppression, which it is not by any stretch of the imagination, seeing as how we are one of the most free countries in the history of the world, if not the freest, for everybody. We are one of the least racist societies that has ever existed. And yet people like this are claiming that everything we know about society is founded on racism, colonialism, patriarchal systems of oppression, and so we need to change everything. Not just climate change, everything. And this just shows one of my real big issues with these climate change activists. And Thunberg is not the only one. AOC has basically said the same thing. For example, if you look at her Green New Deal, it includes a plethora of things that aren't even related to climate change, such as the United States government providing to everybody high-quality healthcare, which is pretty much Medicare for all, affordable, safe, and adequate housing, again, for everybody, economic security, whatever that means, access to nature, whatever that means, create millions of good, high-paying jobs. But basically, the federal government will provide absolutely everything you could ever want. And that's in a Green New Deal. Again, that has nothing to do with climate change. If you're still not convinced, let's see what AOC's previous chief of staff has said. In an interview with the Washington Post talking about the Green New Deal, this is what he says. The interesting thing about the Green New Deal is it wasn't originally a climate thing at all. Do you guys think of it as a climate thing? Because we really think of it as a how do you change the entire economy thing. Let me reread that last phrase. How do you change the entire economy thing? So her chief of staff, who many people believe was basically the brains behind the Green New Deal, admitted that the Green New Deal was not about climate change, it was about changing the entire economy. So Greta Thunberg, AOC, Chakrabarti, they have all basically shown that it's not just about climate change, it's about whatever policy they want. So to basically condense how I feel about many of these climate change activists, I have three main problems with them. First is they rely on fear-mongering to try and get support. If you don't believe me, just think about AOC. She has said countless times the world was going to end in 12 years. She has also said Miami was going to not exist in a few years. Greta Thunberg has talked about how we're currently dying because of climate change, and her dreams and her hopes and her childhood has been stolen. That is the epitome of fear-mongering. And the policies they do provide that are related to climate change generally would either destroy the economy or don't make any sense at all. For example, in the Green New Deal, one of the points about climate change says the following, quote, upgrade all existing buildings in the United States. And they're trying to do this by the year 2030. You cannot upgrade every building in the United States in the next 11 years. That is physically impossible. And then the activists who say we need to stop using fossil fuels entirely, apparently they don't realize it's going to completely destroy the United States economy. And as a result, have a huge impact on the world economy. Not to mention the fact that if you look at the different emitters of CO2, so presumably those who need to cut back on their emissions, the United States, we are fairly large at 16%. China, on the other hand, is at 29%. As a matter of fact, if you add the emissions of China, India, and Russia, three countries that probably won't listen to Greta Thunberg and lower their emissions, you get 41%. So 41% of all emissions in the world come from countries that probably won't listen to the West just because we say you need to lower emissions. Is that, as we already saw, they try and use climate change as an excuse to pass whatever they want. AOC and Chakrabarti want to change the entire economy. Greta Thunberg wants to dismantle things she doesn't like and change everything. And it's really frustrating because there are people who are passionate about climate change. And it's basically these activists' way of using the common people who do care about climate change and providing all this nonsense that they'll then support anyway. It's really surprising how many people don't understand how ridiculous the Green New Deal was. They think it's about climate change, and so they support it automatically, but they've never even read it, and they have no idea how ridiculous it actually is. They just take the word of AOC that it's necessary and required to save the world. So too many of these climate change activists are capitalizing on people's fear, and in many cases stroking the fires of that fear in order to pass whatever legislation they see fit. That is what Greta Thunberg and School Strike for Climate have basically shown here. If you're new to the channel, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. Leave a like or a comment if you feel so inclined. And as always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.